course, we have Jim Rehg. Jim is another one of those very, very delightful people that I'm very grateful for the MD2K that brought him into my life, and I've enjoyed him on many different levels. And Jim, so we are going to begin and tap into your wisdom by asking you the same questions. Tell us your journey.
I'd be happy to. So thanks again for inviting me. So like Susan, I actually grew up in the rural Southeast, believe it or not. So I lived in a place called Waterloo, South Carolina. It was so small it wasn't a town. But when I was maybe in middle school, my father bought me an Apple II microcomputer, and that was my entry into computing, and I got hooked on that, and that really kind of changed my life in a very significant way. I went to college, I went to grad school, very lucky to go to CMU for my PhD. And at that time, I was extremely excited about AI, artificial intelligence, but it wasn't the hot field that it is today. It was actually a shadow of its current self. And so I spent 2 years on that. I learned this programming language called Lisp, which was fun to learn. But after about a year, I realized that AI wasn't going anywhere, and I needed to get out of that business. And so I was very lucky. I had a friend, Alberto Alpez, who was in robotics and vision, and I talked to him, and I learned about computer vision, and that seemed incredibly exciting. So I managed to switch my advisor, get into a different group entirely at CMU, and then I did that for my PhD. And then when I graduated, I think the only thing that I was 100% sure at that time was that I wanted to do research, and I was definitely going to do research the rest of my life, no doubt about that. And you know, there are these cycles in life that you can't control. So there are cycles in the external world. You know, the market gets really good, the market gets bad, it gets better again, and there are cycles in your own life. You know, your work is really doing well, and then it comes down, and then it goes back up. So you've got to, you know, be aware of those cycles and kind of take advantage of them. And I was lucky when I graduated that my work was going really well, and the market was great, and there were lots of opportunities to do research. And so I joined this computer company called DEC that I had a tremendous respect for. I'd used their hardware myself. And they were located in Boston, a great city coming from Pittsburgh. You think, I can go to Boston and live there, you know, amazing. And so I did that, you know, and joined the research lab at DEC. And then after about 3 years, I realized, you know, that they were not doing as well as I had thought. And they were actually acquired by a company called Compaq, which is a PC manufacturer. That was around 98 or so. So my lab was acquired by Compaq, and then we were allowed to kind of drift along and do what we were doing for another few years. And then we learned that our lab was going to be acquired because Compaq was getting acquired by HP. Okay, so at that point, I was really tired of being acquired, and I was also beginning to worry. Maybe I'm part of the, you know, the problem. And at that point, I realized, you know, I was really needed to get into academia. So then I applied, and was very lucky to get into Georgia Tech, and so that kind of set the stage for the rest of my career in academia.
Perfect. So, a question for the audience: how many of you are from Southeast Louisiana? So as you heard from the two stars,
the Southeast is very important.
Yeah,
go there at some point. You know, just drive through. Maybe the South is the key part.
So I was just telling the grad students, this is a good time. You know, if you want to spend some time, there must be something in the water there. So great. Okay. So what excites you about academia, other than being, you know, having to move away from Compaq?
Yeah, so when I was deciding what to do at that point, I realized that although I was in this corporate research environment, most of my work and my effort really was centered around students. So I had these summer interns that would come in, and I would prepare for their arrival. We'd work together over the summer very intensely. Then when they leave, I would sort of clean up all the garbage in their code and try to package things up so that it could be, you know, could be used again. And so I realized that I should find a job where that thing, which is my passion, is really the core part of the job, and not just kind of a side light. And so I think it is really working with students that, you know, that is the most exciting thing and the best thing about academia. And I would say, at least for the kind of the computer science or the kind of, you know, classical kind of, you know, 9-month academic job, if you're not excited about students, I don't think that's really the right job for you. Like, you have to have that excitement, because otherwise, you know, that's part of your mission essentially. And so that's, you know, a big part of the job. And then I think just the research process, you know, sort of picking a problem, all the strategy around what choices do you make, and then solving the problem. So all the problem solving, the fine-grained kind of problem solving that goes along with doing research, and working on that collaboratively with students, and now, you know, as part of a larger team as well in MD2K. I mean, that's just very exciting. I think the process for me is very exciting. And I would advocate, like, the process of what you're doing should be exciting, because the process is always going to be there. The contents will change. You know, you work on different topics, but if you're excited about the process, then that's going to be there forever. So that keeps you in the game.
So then, what kind of skills and experiences do you recommend to someone who wants to be like you?
Yeah, so I think skills can be acquired, So I think that the best way to acquire skill is to pick things that you're excited about, that you believe will move you in the direction you need to go, and then just be very aware of the skills you need, which I think can be hard, but over time you learn that. Like you learn to look at something and assess like what skills do I need, to advance what I'm doing, and then you learn those skills, kind of on the job. So most of the things that I've learned, I really learned, on the job. But I would say writing is really crucial. I mean, communication has come up already, but I would particularly emphasize writing. My advisor was not a great English speaker. He came to the U.S. rather late in his life, but he wrote extremely well. And I learned my writing from him, a kind of non-native, speaker of English. And he communicated very effectively because I think he was so good at capturing what he wanted to say in a relatively short, amount of words. So writing, I would recommend everyone, just write, that helps you. So never pass an opportunity to write is what I would say. And then also I would say, the usual interpersonal skills are really important as well. It's come up already, I think, before.
So what are the three things that you wish you had done as a graduate student that would have better prepared you for the career you're enjoying now?
Well, let's see. So I think being broad, for me, where I am now, I had to become broad to get where I am in some sense. And I think as a student, I was very kind of focused on being very deep. And so in some sense, I would like to have been broader earlier, I think. That might have helped. But I think students make other mistakes as well. Like what I see at Georgia Tech, for example, is we have these incredibly bright students, and they're very ambitious, but then they just take on too many things, So I'll talk to an undergraduate, for example, who wants to, do a research project with me, start a company, and then also do some kind of Kaggle competition, on the weekends. And it's just too much. And so I think it's really important to focus and to pick a small set of things and do them really well.
Just riff on that just a little bit, because if you were listening to what Jim said, he said the opposite of what Susan said. Susan said, be deep and don't worry about breadth. And I actually thought that was odd. I'm much more in line with what Jim was saying, but maybe the way to interpret what Susan was saying was, or at least in computer science, to get a PhD, it's much easier to get a PhD if you demonstrate depth. It's much better for a long-term career if you are willing to be broader and pursue depth as needed. But so I would just, maybe that's what she meant, was that that she was talking about depth being something that it gives you respect. But I don't know. I think breadth with the appropriate depth gives you respect as well.
I think she was responding specifically to my comment about reconciling intellectual purity required for disciplinary advancement with the kind of interdisciplinary needs that team science requires. So I think the world needs more, increasingly, your generation of T-shaped individuals. You go deep in your PhD, and then you go broad. And so, but you have to go deep. You have to be good at something very good. And then you use that and apply it in a broad skill set. So think of yourself evolving into a T-shaped scientist or individual. So what traits, James?
There's a question
sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, so there's a question on the back of that comment.
Can you speak a bit louder so we can tape it?
Yeah, sure, sorry. So I have, in my PhD research career so far, always been in a collaborative environment, and have been fortunate to do a lot of different research in different areas of computer science. But now I find myself that I can't identify myself into one particular area of computer science. So how do I, when I talk to a person and they're looking for that specialty, what should I, how should I respond to that, or how should I tackle that?
Well, I mean, I think that disciplinary boundaries are somewhat arbitrary. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't affect your life and you have to sort of map yourself onto them. That's absolutely true. But I think whatever set of topics you've investigated, they must have captured your interest and captured, your capabilities. And so then I think the challenge, if there isn't a discipline that you sort of obviously fall into, you need to articulate what that discipline is that represents your work. So those three things, let's say, that you're doing, there must be some thread that connects them. Maybe that doesn't have a name, or it's not a thing, in the world, but then you can define what that is. You can articulate that, no, I actually am deep. I'm deep in this particular thing that I do, and it happens to touch on these three areas that are interrelated. So that's how I would frame it, is I would just tell a story that allows people to understand how you arrived at the set of things you've worked on. That's one suggestion.
So Jim, you have a very successful career. You do an enormous amount of contribute broadly to the MD2K enterprise, and you and your wife have raised very wonderful kids. So how do you do all that? How do you reconcile both? Other than do you have any?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking. I really think that research is a vocation, and I'm a Catholic, so that's a specific word to me. But I have a wife and 4 kids, so I shouldn't take it literally. But I think that research, if you say to yourself every morning, my purpose in life is to do research. I mean, that's actually a simplifying, sort of clarifying position from my point of view. So let's say you decide you want to be in academia. So then you want to be maybe in one of the top 30 schools in your field. So there's only 30 of them. And so then the question of where to work, it's a simple question. There's 30 places. You just try to get a job in one of them. And so I think, I think that obviously the world is complicated, and complicated choices are forced on us. But in the end, you have to just decide what you value, and then your partner, obviously, you have a relationship with them, and you've managed to work things out and to compromise and to reach some harmony, long before you presumably face these kinds of choices. So I think you just have to have that clarity of purpose in a way, that you kind of know what you want to do, and then I think everything else just kind of sorts itself out. I didn't plan to be in Atlanta, when I was going to grad school. Actually, my purpose, especially for undergrad, was to get as far away from the Southeast as I possibly could, because I spent a lot of time there, and I wanted to try some other part of the world. So coming back to Atlanta wasn't necessarily a priority by any means, but once the opportunity presented, and I could sort of evaluate that, and I jumped at it. So I think that maybe what I would say is just understand where you're headed and what you want, and then you need obviously to marry somebody you can work with to accomplish those goals.
So what advice would you give your 30-year-old self?
I would look him in the eye and say, you should be doing what I'm doing right now.
Would you, as a 30-year-old, listen to that advice?
No, probably not. That's an unfortunate thing.
What terrific.
I've been working on that answer for a little while.
Joe has been keeping me honest with that big bold sign. And questions for our panelists before we shift to education and industry. Thoughts, questions that you have either for Jim or Ida. Sorry, there was a couple of questions, please.
Hi, this question is to Jim and to Ida as well. Both of you have gone to industry and academia, and what's that transition like? What's the contrast?
Yeah, so I can speak to the kind of the computer science side of that, and other panelists. I think Susan mentioned already that that it's not a two-way street. Like one way is much easier than the other one, and that's absolutely true. And I was lucky, to go to a place where, even though the company was, as it turns out, embattled, the research culture was very strong, and the lab that I was in was a very, good kind of academic-oriented lab. And right now, if you go to companies like Google and you pick the right part of Google, and you go to Facebook and pick the right part of Facebook, and other places as well, IBM and Microsoft, you can have a very fulfilling research career in industry. But the thing to keep in mind is that is a kind of ephemeral thing, and it can change in an instant. When I learned that we were required by Compaq, I came in Monday morning and I was having coffee with my friend, and we chatted for about 20 minutes. And they said, by the way, did you know that Compaq now owns us? Because they had been purchased over the weekend, and there was not an inkling from inside DEC that this was going to happen. Like, no one had any idea. So I think that, in contrast, academia is very stable. You may not like all the aspects of it, but what it is pretty stable, at least in the computer science world. So I think if the timing is right, and you can go around at an industrial lab for a while like I did, there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to be doing research all the time. That's the key. I mean, research is the kind of thing where if you stop doing it, you kind of disappear, and it's really kind of amazing how fast that can happen in some sense. And so I think that as long as you're really focused about that's what I'm doing, and you keep doing it, then I would say regardless of where you are, as long as it's a good environment, you'll have opportunities ahead of you. But I like academia, I will say.
Ida?
Academia, I like it because it is stable and because I have tremendous freedom. As you can tell, I can do all sorts of things that there's no job that would let me do the kind of breadth of stuff that I want to do. I have not actually jumped and worked in industry. I have thought about starting my own company because I have some nonprofits and I can jump and run those nonprofits. That's too much risk for me. So again, it's really asking yourself, what is your own risk tolerance, and then making choices. So I get the benefit of being an entrepreneur without, while having a stable academic job. So that works for me.
May I ask for a quick moment, Gregory? I know we have a distinguished professor of computer science, Gregory Wood from Georgia Tech. Are there any closing comments? You've been sitting there listening. Yeah. Is there any closing comments or pieces of advice you want to share?
I thought those questions you asked were fantastic. And I'm just moving because I have a dual job at Georgia Tech. I'm an associate dean and I have to join a cabinet meeting right now. So I'm actually not leaving. I'll be back in a little bit. Your question about work-life balance. There are a lot of things in life that you don't control. And you just realize. So it's as simple as when you apply for a grad program, the reason you got in or didn't get into particular places were for, a lot of that were for particular things you didn't get into were for reasons you couldn't control. Like your area, the 1 or 2 or 3 faculty area, just that year decided they weren't taking any students in. You may have been good, but when you apply for faculty positions, there are things that you cannot control. One of the things that I couldn't control in my life is I had no control over the fact that 2 of my children had developmental disabilities. And that has been a tremendous impact on my life in terms of my personal commitments, but also became an opportunity professionally. So rather than spend your time fretting over the things that you couldn't control, just accept them and try to make the best of them. And I think that makes your life, produces less stress if you don't worry about things that ultimately you could not control.
Great, thank you. So I want to thank the panelists.